Chapter 18, Yoshi. It still counts, Kira, Yoshi said, even if you don't vomit. Stay still. Kira looked up from her sketch pad and frowned at his pose. While they waited to see if the berries they'd eaten were poisonous, she was drawing him. I hope that boy is okay, Akiko said. Habi, Yoshi sounded out. Habi's name didn't quite work in Japanese, but it was close enough. He was annoying, Kira said. He stole my glory. Yoshi laughed, but Kira silenced him with a dark look. He went back to his pose, gazing up at the crashed plane in wonder, a hand on the hilt of his sword. Vomiting didn't look very glorious. Akiko glanced at the airplane's sheared tree trunk beside her, where a pile of green puke berries sat in case of medical emergency. We don't need those, Yoshi reassured her. Please, play some more. Akiko smiled and picked up her flute again. Well, it wasn't really hers. She'd found it stowed in the flight attendant's closet. Her own instrument was probably somewhere in the trail of wreckage behind the plane. She began to play something soft and slow, and Yoshi let the music soothe his nerves. Waiting around like a lab rat was bad enough, but posing like this was just humiliating. He was also dizzy from hunger. By now it was clear that Kira's interesting berries weren't deadly, and the blueberries he'd tried were not only safe, but delicious. Yoshi wanted to eat 1,000 of them, but he'd promised Anna to wait until sunset before eating more. Sunset. He tightened his grip on the katana, remembering the sound he'd heard last night, the huge body lumbering through the jungle. After Javi had spotted those gouges in the tree trunk today, Yoshi was less certain that it had been all his imagination. Didn't some predators only hunt at night? As the shadows lengthened, the noise of the jungle seemed to come alive. How long will your drawing take? He asked. The scratch of Kira's pencil didn't pause. As long as it takes. Akiko looked up, shrugging an apology as she played. We're wasting time, Yoshi said. We have food and water now. We should be trying to understand this place. Akiko stopped playing. Do you really think we're on another planet? You saw the moons, Kira said. They could have been weather balloons, Akiko said, or rescue planes looking for us. That's what Caleb thinks. Yoshi looked around. But this jungle? These animals? None of it looks like Earth. And the waterfall that feeds our stream? There's something behind it. Kira stopped drawing. What do you mean? I heard a sound on my radio out there. Just beeps. But it had a pattern. He closed his eyes, trying to remember. And I felt something, too. A trembling in the ground, in the air. Some giant process at work. This place isn't still. It's moving, changing around us. When he opened his eyes, Kira was still staring at him. Interesting, she said. Apparently, that was her favorite word. She had worked more of the interesting berries into the bleached lock of her hair, and now it shone a luminous red. I'm going back to the waterfall, Yoshi said, and past it to see what's out there. We can't sit around waiting for this place to eat us. Kira frowned. But if you get lost, we won't have a translator. How inconvenient for you. I'm only saying your Japanese is very good. Yoshi felt his spine stiffen. I was born in Tokyo. But you're a half, aren't you? My mother is American, he mumbled. Kira nodded, as if all her suspicions had been confirmed. Yoshi resumed his pose, mastering his expression as he turned back to the crashed plane. He was used to this, being a curiosity, an oddity, a threat to logic and good sense. He would always be the foreigner, who spoke Japanese too well, who wasn't quite foreign enough. It made people nervous, the way he didn't fit in one box or the other. He wondered if Kira was drawing his face differently, now that she was certain. Do you miss them? She asked. My parents? He shrugged. My mother and I had a fight just before I left, and my father and I were about to have one when I arrived in Japan. Kira shook her head. Poor Yashi-chan, is that why you're so broody? He ignored her. The strange thing was he hadn't thought much at all about home. On the plane, he'd already missed his life back in New York, but that seemed 100 years ago now. Why would he want to sit around talking about manga when he was living in one? "What about your parents?" he asked. "We haven't seen them in a month." Akiko stopped playing to say, "We were in a Swiss finishing school learning how to behave properly." Kira rolled her eyes. "A punishment for me, a reward for her." "I loved it," Akiko said. "We learned all about air kisses and protocol, and we spoke French the whole time." "We learned about table settings," Kira grumbled. "So many forks." Akiko was about to say more, but a bird fluttered into view and settled above them on the wing of the plane. It opened up its mouth and sang a rising note with a little trill at the end. It was one of the slide whistle birds, as Anna called them, the only ones here that sounded like they belonged on Earth. Akiko played her own trill on the flute, a little higher in the pitch than the bird song. It cocked its head, listening. "Almost," Yoshi said. Akiko played the trill once more. This time she matched the bird's song perfectly. Yoshi smiled encouragement. Maybe that flute would be useful. Didn't duck hunters use calls to lure their prey closer? His fingers shifted on his sword hilt. Kira was watching him and spoke softly. "The others will be too afraid to explore with you. They've already been out to the waterfall, only to look for you." Yoshi kept his eyes on the bird. "They're engineers. They're curious." "Engineers aren't curious," she said. "They're cautious. That's why bridges don't fall down. Mostly." Yoshi had to smile at that. It was true that Molly always demanded a long discussion before any decision was made. She wanted theories and conjectures. What would it take to convince her that they needed to go out into the jungle again, where unknown monsters lurked, to search beyond the waterfall for whatever was sending out radio transmissions, to investigate the perfectly circular strands of trees, even if there were shredder birds in the way? Yelling drifted in from the jungle. The others were helping with Caleb's signal fire, which no one would ever see. Yoshi sighed. More time wasted. Unless that foghorn creature was afraid of fire, that was probably why Molly was helping him. The slide whistle bird fluttered down from the wing and alighted on the sheared-off trunk. It stared at Akiko curiously. "You'll need the gravity machine to explore," Kira said. "They won't let you borrow it because you ran off alone and had to be rescued." "They didn't rescue me. I rescued them from Tanglevine, and I was the one who found the source of our water." "They don't see it that way." "How do you know? You can't even understand what they're saying." Kira shrugged. "I don't have to know English to understand them. They think they're smarter than everyone else. That's why they talk everything to death." Yoshi couldn't argue with that. The bird fluttered closer, and Akiko paused to giggle at it. "Keep playing," Kira whispered. She glanced at Yoshi's sword hand and gave him a half-smile. Akiko played the trill again, and this time the bird answered. It hopped along the trunk toward the puke berries, almost within reach. The smell of smoke wafted in from the jungle, along with some cheers. Caleb's signal fire was burning at last. Of course, a fire could be useful for cooking. Yoshi eased the katana halfway out of its scabbard. The freshly oiled metal made no sound, and the bird was interested in the puke berries now. Akiko's eyes were closed as she listened to its song. The felled tree was old wood, hard as iron, but if he swept across it, a horizontal shahi cut just like in practice, he could strike without damaging his blade. The bird hopped closer to the berries. It bent down to peck at them. In one motion, Yoshi drew his sword and struck. The katana flashed sideways through the air. Feathers flew as the bird shrieked and fluttered for a moment toward the sky, but a second later it tumbled down and hit the ground, where it bounced and jittered like oil in a hot pan, blood spraying. Akiko dropped the flute, her scream mixing with slide whistle cries. Yoshi stepped forward, caught the fluttering tail under one foot, and drove the point of his katana through the bird and into soft dirt. An endless moment later, it stopped moving. Akiko started crying, and Kira jumped up and held her tight. "Sorry," Yoshi said. He hadn't meant to scare Akiko, but this bird was food. It was survival. Kira kept her arms wrapped around Akiko's shoulders, but smiled up at him. Yoshi sighed and pulled his sword free. The blood on the metal in the ground was red, just like an Earth's creature's blood. Maybe Anna was right, and these creatures weren't too alien to eat. Smoke was drifting from the jungle now, and the smell made Yoshi even hungrier. He picked up the bird by one limp wing and headed for the building crackle of the fire. This was how you survived. Not with theories and conjectures. You caught your dinner by swinging a blade, not arguing. And you cooked it on the same fire that protected you from monsters. Yoshi was going to find out what was behind that waterfall, whether the others wanted to come or not, even if it meant stealing the gravity device. "Yoshi-chan!" Kira called, and he spun around. Kira still had a protective arm around her sister, but with her hand free, she held out a few puke berries. "Just in case the meat's poisonous?" she said gently. The bird gave a last flutter in his hand, and Yoshi almost dropped it. How was it still alive? He walked back to take the berries.